Welcome to another segment of Behind the Baton. We're lucky to have John Rockwell with us again. You remember we together a few months ago, and the conversation was so illuminating to me that I asked John if he would do another one and touch upon some other subjects that might be of interest to you, certainly of interest to me. We last time we talked about festivals, the festivals that I used to do, and they always were about questions that I had. We talked about music from South America. I didn't know probably more than 5 or 6 composers, and there's so much going on. I just wanted to find out what's going on. The same thing with living composers, because most music directors, you have you get inundated with new scores, and then it takes time to read them. It's like reading a book. You just can't say, oh, here's the score, No, you have to actually spend time and to evaluate which ones are, to use not a better word, but worthy. In a sense, you're going to make a commitment for the orchestra to learn it, and you to learn it, and for the orchestra and for the audience to be exposed to it. So judging that, everything isn't equal. Is there a mystical way, let's say when you were doing the Lincoln Center Festival, that you figure out which pieces should be played for that big audience? You said excitement about new music. Well,
listen,
quality has to be there.
When I was programming the Lincoln Center Festival, one of the reasons I was hired out of the blue by Beverly Sills and Nat Leventhal, respectively at that point chairman and president of Lincoln Center, was that I had just finished 3 years being European cultural correspondent for the New York Times, which had involved total choice of mine. Nobody told me what to do. I just wandered all over Europe.
Not a bad job.
No, it wasn't bad, especially back in the days when we had real expense accounts. But nonetheless, I've been exposed to a ton of stuff, not just classical music, but dance and opera and theater and all over Europe. So I had a ready reservoir of stuff that I wanted to bring over. I thought it would be a good idea to expose New York audiences to if we could pull it off financially. And but the answer to your question, I would only go for things that I like to hear and see, things that excited me. And I had to live on the innocent faith that if it excited me, it would excite enough other people to pay the rent, which sometimes it did and sometimes it didn't. But on the whole, we did okay financially, and we brought over a lot of good stuff. And Nigel Redden continued to do that, and Harvey did it at BAM, and Harvey Lichtenstein. And, but the ultimate answer, if you're a programmer or a conductor or whatever, is that you do what excites you, and you hope that it will excite others.
It's also that incredible balance. I remember there was a young conductor in a small orchestra, and he did his first season, and he was very excited about new music, and it was so much new music on it. But it was a lot. It wasn't like 3 or 4 composers. It was like 10 composers. So the audience didn't really get a grasp of who anyone was or what their language was. And it was like you kept throwing material at them. And I said, wow, it's a lot. I care so much about character. Okay, I love it. I said, good luck. I hope it goes well. So the season now is halfway done.
Well, this is right now. You're talking.
Yeah, this was a couple of years ago. And he calls me up and he says, I'm in real trouble. I said, what's wrong? He said, well, I think they're trying to fire me. I said, why is that? He said, because the programming is terrible. They hate my programs. And I said, well, the program isn't terrible at all. It's just that there's too much music that they never heard and don't know, and you're not giving them a chance to absorb any one composer, just inundating them. Why not for next season? Why don't you come up with a program that's a little more balanced with a few composers that you really like and really delve into their repertoire so that the audience can get to know them. And he says, so he sends me the programs. I went through them. I thought they were pretty good. Made some changes to some suggestions. This is about 3 or 4 years later. He still has his job. Because it's not a question that they didn't want new music. They wanted to feel like it made sense and there was a balance.
Yeah, all that is right, except that that's what, when we talked the last time about the idea of doing concentrated festivals or thematic programming running through the course of the subscription programs, that set up themes and attract the kind of people who like that kind of music. In other words, if you're in San Francisco, Bay Area, and are interested in Californian new music of the last, from Henry Cowell on, there's such a range of variety, so much of it on Pacific Rim geared toward Asia. And it's a real aesthetic that I personally love, and a lot of other people do too. And I think MTT's programming focused attention on that kind of repertory in a way, so that he did a lot of contemporary music, but he did it in concentrated bursts, appealing to the audience that was interested in that, or maybe a new audience that could become interested in that.
Yeah, I mean, he did a phenomenal job, and I think their choice now, Esteban Solomon taking over, is probably in embracing what they've had before and moving forward in a similar direction.
It does make, with the San Francisco-LA rivalry, however, it seems a little odd to bring in the guy who was in LA forever to come to San Francisco, but other than that, hey, more power to it.
Yeah, but I mean, the people in San Francisco weren't going to the concerts in LA, so that's it.
Yeah, I suppose. But it's like bringing in half the Dodgers to play for the Giants. You don't want to do that.
Look, LeBron James is playing for the Lakers now.
Yeah, but he never played for the Warriors.
Well, so I'd like to talk a little bit about. I mean, we used to call it pop music. Do we still call it pop music?
Yeah, in fact, we do it more than ever, because in the old days, well, I considered myself a rock critic, but now all the pop people call, and especially the popular music academicians, the American culture crowd, call it pop music. I mean, in April, there's an annual concert of popular music out in Seattle at the Experience Music Project. And it used to be a rock conference, now it's a pop conference. In fact, they've changed the name to Mo Pop. The EMP is no longer EMP, it's now Mo Pop.
When I had an aside on that, when Paul Allen was wanting to do that,
sure.
I met with his sister, and they were going to call it the Jimi Hendrix Museum.
Well, that was a mistake.
And I said, no, Jody, I don't think that's a good idea. It should be a little broader than
that guitar tree in the middle of the atrium. However, is pretty cool.
It's very cool. Anyway, so I'm not sure they took my advice, but they ended up not calling it the Jimi.
Well, I think pop is. I mean, rock now represents a kind of post-blues, largely white, four-square kind of music that was very popular in the late 50s into the 60s and 70s, but now has been supplanted by so much, modern-day black music. They call it still rhythm and blues, but, and also hip-hop and rap and all of that, that the term rock no longer fits.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's, pop has become the term.
So, because you're in both of those worlds, and with distinction, I can say in both of those worlds. So, Bernstein said, I love rock, I love all music as long as it's good music. And film music. I mean, I happen to be a big fan of film music. Do you ever try to say, well, this is high art, and this is medium size art, and this is low art? And
no, I mean, especially the people in the quote-unquote pop world hate those distinctions and regard all high art as, toys of the rich, which could be just discounted by the very nature of their patronage. But, I mean, Bernstein was right that every genre of music has greatness in it. And I liked rock and roll or pop music. I mean, pop, in my day, when I was a rock critic, pop was regarded as kind of frothy and trivial, whereas now it embraces the entire field of demotic music. But I'm an ex-60s guy, and for me, popular music, or rock music, was a form of music that said things in a direct and sincere and intense and passionate way. In that way, it's like opera. And my joint interest in rock music and opera is not so far apart as you might think. And maybe I'm just becoming an old codger, but a lot of the popular music today strikes me as much more deliberately entertaining rather than
Yeah.
rather than trying to say important and compare Dylan with some of the. On the other hand, a lot of the pop music today is saying important things, especially about black culture, and but I mean, my interest in music was always. That's why I called my first book All American Music. I mean, it was a joke, All American, rah rah rah, but also all kinds of American music.
Yeah.
And now of course you have to include every form of ethnic music in the world. I mean, there's high quote unquote and low quote unquote art in India and in North Africa and in South America and so forth. And there are great classical traditions in Japan and China and Indonesia and that music is enormously successful. Whereas, I mean, artistically successful. And African music, African popular music today has produced some of the greatest singers there are. From Youssou N'Dour to Angelique Kidjo to Salif Keita, on and on they go. I'm reminded of this. Recently there was this William Kentridge show called The Head and the Load, played at the 67th Street Armory in New York, which was a huge panoply of African, sub-Saharan African cultures keyed around the notion of the slaughter of 1 million or 2 million black soldiers and porters during the First World War. But I mean, the amount of variety of music in that show, quite apart from everything else, visual, choreographic, Terpsichorean, theatrical, and so forth, was just astonishing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really need to take second place to any of the high art of Europe, even though the high art of Europe, classical music, remains sort of the center of my aesthetic world. And you have people, especially conservative critics, I think of Ed Rothstein, who used to complain that this open-eared enthusiasm for different kinds of music and high and low music and so forth was eliminating all forms of standards. How can you say that Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is equal to some Arabic pop song heard in a taxi? Well, of course you don't say it's equal, but you don't automatically dismiss the Arabic pop song
as being frivolous, unimportant, and,
that's correct.
mediocre.
I mean, there's a Putumayo CD called Arabic Groove, which is one of the most exciting and amusing. It's pop music from 10 or 15 years ago out of North Africa. It's thrilling.
Well, I remember having a discussion once with a friend about film music and compared to symphonic music. And, and as I said, I'm a fan, but it's different. I mean, the length is different, the desires are different, the development is
The
different.
control over what you hear is different.
Everything is
but
done.
are you talking more like Herman and Korngold and those people?
Yeah.
Because
And John Williams. And
that's a form of classical music that's been extended to. I mean, it was Spielberg and Lucas who revived the idea of symphonic music as being
Getty and
as opposed to Leonard Rosenman or Leonard Bernstein or people like that who wrote a different kind of film music.
Yeah.
Not to speak of Rock Around the Clock and Blackboard Jungle.
What do you think symphony orchestras should have or can or have a place in playing what let's call it pop music?
No, because it always sounds hoity-toity and stupid.
That's what I
and also it's complicated by the acoustics of these big symphony halls, which are designed to perform a kind of reverberation. And unless you really treat these halls with all kinds of sound deadening hangings and so forth, amplified loud music sounds terrible in these big halls.
I remember when in our last session I talked to Wynton Marsalis. Wynton was coming to Seattle with his jazz band, big band, and I said, "Don't amplify." They said, "What do you mean? I've always amplified." I said, "Well, this is a concert hall, and it has good acoustics, and if you don't have a singer, maybe the double bass, maybe the bass should be amplified, maybe the piano, but that's it. You don't need it. you guys all have big sounds, you can project, and it's a hall made for that. And I've never done it. I've never played without him. I said, the problem is you're going to get double reverberation. You get the reverberation.
Well, not unless you treat the hall.
Unless you
then,
treat the hall.
but then you're. I mean, like for example, we had at the Lincoln Center Festival a guy named Paul King who now actually works at the. What does he work at the Armory now? I think so. Maybe he's gone over to Hudson Yards. I don't know, but he was great at sound treating halls to suit the music that was being performed. And when you did popular amplified music at Avery Fisher Hall, David Geffen Hall, you had to hang a lot of deadening
sound
stuff.
because amplification doesn't really work in that sense.
But quite apart from the acoustics, to try to mix the genres of popular music and the symphonic, usually the symphonic orchestra winds up being a kind of boring background strings thing.
Well, it's, it's like saying have the pop group play the Baton Fifth Symphony. Really?
Well, of course not. But I mean, for example, I was a big friend and admirer over many years of Ornette Coleman's, and in the first Lincoln Center Festival in '96, or was it '7? The first festival was '96, but I can't remember. We did an Ornette Coleman festival within the festival, and various groups of his played, but we did Skies of America, which is his big piece for whatever his current electrically amplified band and
symphony orchestras are huge.
And one of my coups was to get Kurt Mazur to do it with the New York Philharmonic. It was great. Mazur came. I get along very well personally with Mazur.
So did I.
And we go up to 125th Street where Ornette's Harmolodic studio was, and hang out there discussing a little. That all said, it's not a very good piece. In other words, I had actually arranged for him to do that with the Fort Worth Symphony for the opening of a jazz club 20 years before that, the same piece, Skies of America. But it breaks down between the jazz group doing its thing and then the orchestra sort of coming in boringly.
I have a story about that because I played with Ornette and I recorded with him a few times. And when he had a famous trumpet player, Don Cherry.
Sure.
Great trumpet player, and they would get into fights every once in a while. When he get into a fight, he would call me and ask me to come and play, which I would do. And now I'm playing trumpet in the New York Philharmonic, and he's recording Skies of America with the London Symphony.
That's right, but that was a weird thing because it was not really his full band. It was
mostly
him.
It's him and the orchestra. So in the middle of the night, I get a phone call. He said, "Jerry, you got to come over here to London. You got to help me out." And I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "Well, these guys, they can't play this stuff. You got to get on a plane. Get over here." I said, "Well, Ornette, I am in the New York Philharmonic, and I do have to go to rehearsal in the morning. So you tell him you can't come. Just get over here."
Did you?
No, I did have a day job or a night job. What about, we see now all the time, even the New York Philharmonic and the Philadelphia Orchestra playing. I'm asking it in a disdainful way. I'm sorry. What do you think about all these orchestras playing the movie scores while the movie is being projected?
It's a gimmick, but it's not a bad gimmick. I mean, Phil Glass does the same thing with his, Katsi movies, Koyanis Katsi, Nakor Katsi, and Pala Katsi. He recorded the soundtrack for those movies. Koyanis Katsi is a flat-out masterpiece. The other two were a little less good, but still. But they go around and show the movie silently, and the Philip Glass Ensemble plays it. But it's also, as you say, they do all the big Korngold and Bernard Herrmann scores and John Williams. I'm not a huge John Williams fan, except for the score for AI, did you ever see that movie? No. Oh, you ought to. It's a good movie. It's a little robot boy it's Pinocchio, who wants to be human. But the score is really interesting. Anyway, whatever.
I am a John Williams fan. I think.
No, I know. I mean, I'm not a huge movie music fan, period. I mean, I just figure if I want to hear Congo, let's hear some real music that he wrote.
Which he did.
Right.
Some great music. I have a problem with great orchestras playing background music to a film. I mean, yes, it brings in a big audience, and they're a young audience. I guess it has a place, and so on. But on the other
But
hand,
it's not a distortion of the music.
no. But do you need the New York Philharmonic to be playing?
Well, I don't know. Well, a lot of those scores were played by what was in fact the L.A. Philharmonic, with a different name.
It's true.
I mean, if it's a big symphonic score, and if you like the music, and if you like the composer, why not have the orchestra play it?
There was a great trumpet player in the LA Philharmonic, Tom Stevens, who died last year, and as you pointed out, he would play a lot of the movie scores. And one day at the Hollywood Bowl, Arthur Fiedler came to conduct some big movie score potpourri of themes, and he was, I don't know if you knew him at all, but he was a very ornery guy, and he started complaining to these musicians. Did you ever go to the movie? Did you ever hear this? You know, what are you doing? And so Tom said, excuse me, Mr. Fiedler, we played it. You know?
Right. Well, I mean, it's true in L.A., but it's not true in most orchestras around the country.
No, it's not.
But, I mean, I don't see any moral issue here. I mean, or even musical. If audiences want it, if the conductors want it, I don't personally. I'm not a devotee of that music. So therefore, I wouldn't necessarily go to those things.
The great first oboe of Philadelphia Orchestra, Dick Woodhams, retired this past year. He a remarkable musician, and in his like essay about leaving, one of the things that he was upset about was that orchestras were like Philadelphia were playing background music to a film, which he didn't think was an appropriate use of their talent.
He didn't like Fantasia.
Well, that's a little different.
Well, not too much, but sure. I mean, it's real music with animation. So, and the silhouette of Stokowski shaking hands with
Mickey Mouse.
Right.
Well, the great thing about that, when I sometimes conduct youth orchestras or university orchestras, and if I ever mention Stokowski's name, and I say, "How many of you ever heard of Stokowski?" Basically, no one's ever heard of Stokowski. And then I said he was the one who shook hands with Mickey Mouse and Fantasia. Then they know who Stokowski was.
He was such a funny duck, old Stokowski. I never knew him, but strange guy in the sense of a fake Russian accent, and yet such a smart champion of new music. So, I mean, you just didn't quite know what to make of him.
Yeah, I played with him for 7 years.
Yeah?
And I found...
Did you respect him in standard rep?
I was a youngster. I was 18. I was just so thrilled to be there.
Was that Philadelphia or American Symphony?
American Symphony. And you're rehearsing on Carnegie Hall stage, you're playing, and you're getting paid? I mean, and Stokowski, yeah, it was really strange, but I wasn't sophisticated enough to make a judgment. You know, when he did the Tchaikovsky Fourth, he had me play the first horn part for half the opening, which the trumpets never played. You know, at first I wouldn't do it. You know, and I saw he had his own parts. You know, he had written out all these things you're supposed to add, and then the trumpet comes in with the horns. You know, I didn't play. And he slams his hand. You play! It's in the part. You know, he knew that. Yes. You know.
Well, I mean, conductors in those days used to tinker with scores all the time. Look at Mahler with Beethoven.
Mahler with Bach.
Bruno Walter with Mozart.
Yeah.
I mean, there was plenty of examples.
We still tinker, but hopefully you don't notice. We try to hide the tinkering.
Well, I mean, tinkering is plausible. I mean, the one thing we've not discussed in our discussions is the impact of the early music movement on symphony orchestras, because when you're playing in a huge hall way larger than anything ever contemplated by Haydn or Mozart or somebody, tinkering with the instrumentation just to beef up the sound a little bit to make it work in a larger space. But a lot of that music a lot of those performances now sound overblown when you're used to Norrington or Gardner or somebody like that. And I still have an affection for the later, the Vienna Philharmonic after the Second World War style of Mozart playing compared to...
I do too. I mean, the thing, what I feel about it, of course, is that there's lots of room for lots of ways to do good music.
True, except that fashions rule and a thinner kind of instrument. Everybody does Beethoven now with smaller modern orchestras than they used to.
Because Handel and Mozart both love the idea of a huge orchestra.
Do you think Handel would have liked Beecham's recording of Messiah?
Probably not. I think the cymbals would have gone too far for
I
him.
know, it's really over the top.
But you know, someone just recently asked me to do a commentary about the Goldberg variations. It's not well, my favorite recording and blah blah blah. Okay, and I said, think about the Goldberg variations, like the Beethoven Fifth, is that you could play it with almost any instrument, and it works. The first time I ever played in an orchestra in high school, the Beethoven Fifth, the string parts were being played by mandolins.
That sounds a little odd.
It was the New York Mandolin Orchestra or something like that. And every year they'd rent out.
Your career has evolved.
They'd rent out Town Hall in those days,
Right.
and they'd come and they'd play, you know. But the wind parts and the brass parts and the timpani were played by young kids.
Right.
And you know, I sat there and I think, wow, this sounds like the Beethoven Fifth. It actually works in its bizarre way. And so, for me, I'm not a purist. I love Bach on the piano. I mean, if you're a purist, you really should want it on the harpsichord.
I want some big festival or opera company to do a first-class production with great singers, great scenery, and so what, of Boris Godunov in Rimsky's orchestration. I think Rimsky's orchestration is fabulous. I don't have anything against Shostakovich or the quote-unquote Mussorgsky original, but that gimmicky recording where Christoph does all the bass parts and Dobrovin conducts.
Yeah.
It's the best Boris out there.
Phenomenal. Well, I'm a great Rimsky fan. You know, I've done a lot
too.
I've done like 5 CDs of his music. A much greater composer than, you know, when I used to play, because Stokowski played a lot of Rimsky-Korsakov, and I used to think, oh, that's all right.
But the operas are so good.
And so many in there.
Yeah.
And the opera, there's just so much
The
music.
Legend of the Invisible City of Kitezh, the Russian Parsifal, is, you know, one of the great masterpieces. And the idea that the Met has never done it, I assume they haven't done it.
No,
Maybe Gergiev would have brought it in with the Mariinsky at some point, but it's such an amazing opera. But there's so many of them, and I mean, and then when you get, there's another thing, when people revive lost works, symphonic or operatic, but don't do a good job of it, they ruin it for
That's
a
right.
generation.
And then they say it's a
Sarah
piece of
Caldwell did that, and I think our friend Leon Botstein does that a little too often. I mean, I admire him for his programming, for sure.
Oh, tremendous.
And he's gotten much better as a conductor, but even so, he did a Rimsky thing this past summer at Bard, and it was not a great...
You can't, I mean, Rimsky needs to be interpreted. It's not like the Goldberg variation or the Beethoven Fifth.
Well,
I mean, they're different. I mean, same thing with a lot of American music.
I mean, Gergiev owns that stuff now.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, he's not necessarily so good in Beethoven, but he's wonderful with the Russian repertoire.
He's I think, a great conductor. But let's say, well, yeah, I leave it to you to decide about his Beethoven.
Well, I just never heard him do anything. There's another thing you mentioned, which I thought was worth making a comment on if we have time.
Sure.
Which is the breadth of repertory that the modern symphony orchestra has to encompass, from, you said, Bach and Handel, but it could go earlier and it could go right up to the present. And not every orchestra and not every conductor is equally strong in all aspects of that repertoire. Correct. And if you're a music director, it seems to me one of the things you've got to do is figure out what you want to do and what your strengths are, and know how to delegate to an associate conductor or a guest.
The perfect example was Zell in Cleveland. When he felt he really couldn't deal with new music, he hired Boulez.
Okay.
And Boulez came in and did that music for him, and of course Zell was a great admirer of his. John, such a great pleasure. Thank you so much for doing this and for being with us on our show.
Your little adventure here.
Yeah, it's a great pleasure. Thank you.